So, Tobias, as far as if I remember correctly, we've got another 10 days of the official inscription period for the new executive masters of advanced studies in regenerative systems, and the next CAS, the next certificate of advanced studies that is linked to that. Um, you've spent the last 2 weeks talking to lots of really interesting people from all over the world that are interested in the program. Um, what are the things that make people choose this program or get interested in potentially taking part in it?
Yeah, Daniel, I think it's a really fascinating time to speak to these people who are so self-motivated and interested and curious to learn about regenerative systems, about designing for resilience. And it's a huge diversity of different people from different backgrounds, different phases in life, different cultures. And I can just maybe some examples where someone who has an engineering background, work in engineering company in environmentally very relevant technology, realizes that there's more where he would like to be able to understand different facets of a system that go beyond the technical engineering part and connect and have more impact, looking a bit in the inner transformative perspective of transformation and change, to someone who is working in kind of community development and wanting to have a motivating learning community about how to spur change in communities, different types, both in terms of building kind of place where communities live and interact, but also in any kind of policy making contexts. What are different hands-on advice, learning lessons, also kind of tools, also methods that are both science-based and same time, experienced and shown in practice. And so there's a whole reach of these different engaged and curious people who I think in general look both for a better scientific grounding. That's why they would come to an engineering school of this, let's say, reach and possibility, and same time are very curious and have made themselves a lot of thoughts already how to connect with the deeper inner processes in us, in humans, in ourselves, and connect these different elements. And that's just usually not done and not out there. So I think that's quite unique.
I mean, a couple of things that I find are very unique, if not unique, almost unique, if not unique, that are part of this program. And one of them is this focus on either a personal or team quest from the start when people actually apply for the program. Can you just describe that a bit? I mean, we've been working on it together, but for people who are listening, it might be of interest to and describe how that has helped also the first group of CAS graduates that we've already had last year.
Yeah, the quest is a fascinating tool. It's a fascinating practice. I would call it. I mean, we call it a bit of a compass, a navigation, a guiding spine that helps us to address and connect different learning aspects, element, topics, themes, conversations to our own interest. It helps us to be aware and become aware of consciously evolving, developing what interests us, asking questions and reformulating questions, prioritizing questions, clustering questions, and then getting support of the program. On the one hand, it nudges us to formulate and also sketch graphically our questions, discuss them with our peers, and relate them to all the input, both from the massive open online course series and all this content, but then, of course, deepen, expanding with the invited experts, the speakers in our conversations, in our mentoring of the quests. And at the end, the quests are evolving. They are non-linear, they're emergent, and they evolve, which is beautiful to see, the power that it unfolds, and also the practicability, both for a specific project that someone brings, and same time in correspondence with what happens on an inner perspective with everyone involved, but also the groups. And that in the end is the basis for a potential future master design thesis at the end of the program. So it's already each certificate of advanced studies, like the next one, will evolve what has happened in the previous one, or it will be the first one that will be evolving in the next one. And that's a beautiful life documentation and a big guidance in learning within complexities.
I mean, we've already made the experience with some of the participants of the first course that people take the program and structure their quests in such a way that it actually helps them develop a piece of work that they are working on with their employer. And that often they even relay some of the learning from the quest to a team that they might be working with. So that's the vision of the team quest, of either having one person working with a team where what they're learning is reflected in their work, or actually have more people from an organization on the course and collectively working on a team quest, which I think is a great idea for all sorts of businesses to develop like new areas of their business or a new business plan. So yeah, can you name any of the examples of how people have used the quest creatively with an employer?
I think there's just coming up two really interesting examples. One is one participant who is basically leading a group, an organization. He's the boss of that let's say department, and so he came mostly for tapping into the unknowns of his own, let's say, past pathways, and getting to know himself much better through the quest, and making this quest process available, how to guide and lead his team and how to become a better leader. So there was the kind of giving it to the group by the one who finances that program for himself, and understands that this is of value for his work and for being a better leader, and thus being also more successful in his work and with himself. And the other part was where a leader of a family business finance supports an employee to study in the program, and the quest of this employee who studies with us is basically of direct value for the company. So it's a kind of company problem or challenge or question that then the employee studies at his or her quest and evolving quest. And it's beautiful to see that the foresight of this company leader, of the boss, let's say, financing this program for the employee, leads to a kind of indirect study agreement where the employee feeds back in a regular context to a group of people, the employees, or just the financier, to filter and give summaries and excerpts of what they learn and how this evolves the quest. So there's a beautiful, I think, also service that someone can offer by studying in depth in this program and offering a kind of indirect co-study agreement to someone else in their team, in their friends, family, supporters, from a company to our own environment, and that's of huge practical value.
I often thought that it could easily be like a person or even a team that was working on developing a new business, a business plan, and a whole business model could easily take the course to deepen their initial project idea and use the quest to basically develop the business plan, develop the necessary networks for being a successful business in that field, and come out at the end of all of that with a master's that is to some extent describing what they're now going to do with their business. So it's another. I mean, we haven't had that example yet, but it's possibly coming up for some of the people that are that are
Yeah,
working.
it's a big difference that we still think sometimes we're studying a kind of whatever academic program, and at the end we're doing our thesis, and then we look for the practical value of it, and then it's a theoretical exercise. But this is so different. It's the quest, people apply with the quest, and we help to further develop the quest, but the whole cohort of practitioners or professionals learn together, supports each other. And so this quest means there's happening transformational change from day one on. And when someone finished the first CAS, we can already see in the first line, it's transformative, deeply transformative, both on a personal basis and on a kind of quest, a job professional basis. And they will just be amplified throughout the whole program. So it's when the program is finished, then the project around the quest, the regenerative design project, is basically in its implementation phase deeply evolved, and that's a big difference to conventional study programs.
And the other thing that is also really good about this program, to my mind, is that it's extremely flexible with regard to how people can enter the program, and it sort of blends the cohorts. So when we've now had the first CAS running, but somebody could now begin the second certificate of advanced studies and then run through and do the first one later. And so there's an entry point multiple times a year. There's an option for more full-time and more part-time study. You could do one class a year, you could do two classes a year. And so it's a blended learning program that has a necessary group intensive where people come together, and we'll talk about why in a minute. But most of it is online and quite flexible, so people can actually also do this course without problem while there's continued the working year.
Yeah, I think that's a very big point. It's designed and addressed for people who are busy, as we all are, for real life learning while we're having family duties, we're having professional installments, we're having ups and downs. So it's just very real life, and we talk about complex systems and regeneration and resilience, and we're trying to live and walk the talk by having a very adaptive, flexible program where we have also the chance to relate to individual situations of people. So that's very open, and I think for so far we can accommodate any of these needs in here. And the hybridization, this what you mentioned, it's online, it's highly flexible, one part, it's deeply physical and embodied on the other part. And this combination in a very flexible manner, that just works really well. And that's both for participants and co-learners, very powerful and adaptive, and same time also for us and for everybody who is involved. It makes very much sense. Yeah.
And the other thing that I so enjoyed when you first invited me to help work on the MOOC, which is also a beautiful part of this program, that it is based on a series of MOOCs, which means that while ETH and the CAS and the MAS have a price tag that is to do with being one of the best universities in the world, I think in the first 10 of the world, the MOOC makes this material accessible for people everywhere. And we've already had 6,500 people from 110 countries use this offer. And on the Designing Resilient Regenerative Systems Mighty Network side, there are actually people that are building a cohort or an alumni network that has the option of finding itself and engaging in taking the learning into practice themselves in their region. So we're actually helping to build a network with the course. And that's already happening in some places. Like the people have found themselves or found each other through the MOOC and started regional projects.
We're using this tree metaphor of having the four MOOCs as a kind of massive crown that brings in interested people and has an ability to sniff in and access the content in one's own pace. Globally, as you mentioned, it's free of costs. And at the end, this is very highly appreciated because that ivory tower kind of thinking and access is opened up. And somehow the executive program for those who want to invest in this kind of deep education and a complete degree at this from ETH University, as somehow support indirectly, directly also this global access to free education and the reciprocity of coming from a MOOC into the executive program, for example, the first certificate of advanced studies, and then bringing some of their professional experience around their quest as well back into the MOOC. That's already happening, and so it's self-actualizing and updating a system where, we can say whoever decides to come into this executive deep study program, wanting to also gain a degree of this high reputation, at the end also directly and indirectly supports access to free education on this level globally. And that's a really beautiful sense-making organic system that's very emergent as well. And that's also how we work. Sometimes new content enters the MOOC, not because it's planned, but because it emerges from discussions, from participants who offer something that we couldn't plan for. And at the end, that's again walking the talk to me. We try to live this flexibility and organicity by enacting with what's happening, in addition to having, of course, a clear structure and pedagogic goals, etc. That's not the question, but the question, the beauty is to open up and let things also emerge and immerse, which is at the end part of regenerative systems.
Also, I mean, we both met in our shared convictions that real education has to be, if it aims to communicate knowledge, it has to be applied, because otherwise it just repeats information. Information only turns into knowledge in its application. And so running through the whole structure of the MOOC is this, both through the quest, direct application of what is learned in a personal quest, but then there's also this reflection of reflecting what we learn in terms of methodologies and so on in specific territories. So there's the bioregional living systems lab of the Upper Po Valley, the Monviso Institute that you started 10 years ago. And then there's the other regional application learning center that well, it's not a center yet, but the work that I've been doing here on Mallorca for the last 12 years, or that I've been curating, connecting, it's other people have been doing the work, just as in Monviso, other people have been doing the work. But it's by giving the conversation around the cross-scalar governance spiral and how different scales of design are interconnected and how we have to pay attention to their interconnection, a real-world context of a real-world bioregion, we also bring so much more wealth into the program because of that application dimension, and bringing the people into these bioregions, and not just in a sort of way where they get shuttled around in a bus from A to B to visit a few projects and have a few lectures, but in a way where it's with dynamical engagement, both with real world projects and traveling through the landscape on a bicycle or doing a long hike as a group. All of that is part of the pedagogy, because it's the human relationships that we forge in these short intensives when we are in the territory and apply what we're learning that fundamentally transform how people can learn together in the online space. But can you say a little bit more about the kind of embodied part of the program and particularly like the systemic cycles and the experience of the first group intensive?
Yeah, that's a really core part. And I can just say, from sometimes visiting Mallorca and the Balearic Islands and learning from your work they've been doing and connecting people, project, places, ideas, the weaving, that's so learningful, so meaningful, because you participate in very complex, at the end, social cultural processes that are around how we use the land, how we interact as part of nature. And that is something we can only partly study in theory. It's very important to have a sound theoretical grounding, and that's also what our program is standing for, sound scientific base. We're teaching scientific methods, quantitative, qualitative, For example, social network analysis is a very good example. For me, one of the most powerful, scientific tools that have so much practical value. And when we learn in the MOOC already about social network analysis and relational understanding of social networks and interpretation of network metrics, what does it mean in practice? So when we go to one of these bioregional centers or living system labs, or however you want to call them, then we are not just doing a snapshot look at something, as you said, not as a tourist, but also not as a classic case study trip, but these field design trips to us apply that we are in the field out there and we are co-designing, co-shaping processes that have been going on for some time. So we are adding, we are there for a short amount of time, 1-2 weeks, and we're adding to ongoing processes, and we're experiencing live what is our impact by enacting the system. And in the terms of social networks, it could mean that we're confronting local community members, municipality policymakers, diverse landowners, for example, with the network graphics of a previously executed social network analysis. And we experience how people react when they see their own position in a kind of relational network, visual printed. And that can also be embodied. That can be done either on paper in a kind of visual dialogue, standing around a table. It can also be done outside, which we often do, on the field with rocks, stones. So it can be manifest. And that's really valuable as an experience. And the other part, which you mentioned, is the growing together as a cohort, as a group, which makes a total different learning experience, both within the peer groups, but also with our roles that we have different hats on here. So embodied cognition, experiencing flow, being taken out of our comfort zones physically through cycling, for example, and mentally, and what this makes in opening up and building trust, that is directly helpful for the learning process of this virtual course and the following virtual sessions, because we can be very open with each other and it's a very trustworthy environment. And same time, it's deeply transformative insight. And that is based on decades of outdoor education experience of aspects like mountain guiding, where it's part of the culture and the practice to play with comfort zones and come into the learning zones back in a safe space. And that's extremely powerful also from the first cohort, how we can transform that then from having this experience in this short amount of outdoor time together and bring this into a transformative practice to enact with out of comfort zone times in our daily life, in our projects, in our work, in our hometown.
Also the embodied, like I wasn't on the actual tour with you when you took the cohort around the Upper Po Valley bioregion, but the feedback that I got a lot was that experiencing a physical territory through being on a bicycle and moving through the territory of that at that pace gave people a whole different feeling of the kind of high alpine part of the bioregion and then the lower valley part of the bioregion, and what actually the relationship between one and the other is, because they literally traveled through the landscape rather than just experienced it through a sort of passive driving through it.
It gives connection to the place. It gives some embodied experience cognition to mapping a place when we work with the frameworks, like you mentioned, the circular cross-scale governance spiral, and talk about 8 scales of governance. And we have the region, the landscape, the city buildings, the supply chain materials, etc. Then making this place specific is very theoretical. But once you cycle through and before you saw the map, you worked on, then you map further on. That's a very holistic experience, and that can be transformed into our own bioregions, our own places, because all the quests, they do have a kind of place relation as part of working in regeneration. So everything somehow manifests as well in place. And so the experiences we do in the field design trips are directly related and of practical value to wherever our participants come from and whatever they do. And that's a very powerful facet and learning element in that as well.
Also, because of course we've already talked about multiple ways that the quests can be used for people, but since we have a diversity of participants that come in, and some people might have an idea of what they want to develop, but they haven't got the clear idea of what context to focus on. Those two bioregions also in a beautiful way offer a context where people can then work out of the specificity of a real location and a real culture on a particular idea. And that then in a beautiful way also makes a gift to the bioregion, because both you in the Upper Po Valley and me here on Mallorca are committed to this bioregional development in the long term. And so collaborating with these students that are highly skilled and highly professional on maybe doing a piece of work around carrying capacity of an island like Mallorca, in order to learn about that kind of analysis, then immediately brings that learning into also a benefit to the local community, because it can support the local conversation with regard to regenerative development of the islands.
Yeah, it's part of also I think this bioregional work is that we bring groups who are not just visitors, but they are part of transforming the system. And I think there's at least two components in here. One is the actual action that they do. If they, as said before, I mean, if they help a farmer for some time, there's actual help of 20 people for 2 hours. That is a kind of help. Or if they uh, uh, confront a local community workshop with previous done footprint analysis or social network analysis or some scientific data work that is being discussed and set in relation, that's one direct value. The indirect value, the meta perspective, to me is, I think, as or even more important, is the impact that it has to repetitively visit a place to ask questions that are, of course, informed in a certain direction, that show certain actors in the region that topics that maybe are not in that particular context yet so developed do have relevance. And so we basically participate in long-term developments actively with each time we enact. And also the fact that often in the region that we bring these groups and we are interested, we trust, honestly interested to also learn from the people. It's not a top-down perspective. We bring knowledge, but we learn from it with them together. That shapes trust, and it helps to all the other work that many people are doing in this context. And this is an experience, again, I would say it's both a hard method and a rich array of soft experiences that can be transformed back. And what you often remind us, Diane, what I learned from you as well, is the notions of scaling, the different types of scalings, because we often get used, so you do this one thing, what about scaling it up? Yeah, I'm really glad that this is so clear and rich, how we scale deep into a place and how we scale out, because we can learn from the experiences, the questions, the elements for another place that might be slightly different. So it's not copied and pasted, but it has impact, and that's a huge type of scaling that then again enters the Massive Open Online course series, and it spreads out, and then it comes back. So we're having already 2 or 3 other actors, alumni in our program who are enacting with their own bioregion, have been for a long time, but now they're doing it more consciously. They're having more tools, more examples, and we're bringing this back in. So what you described, what you've been doing on Mallorca, for example, a lot of people can learn from this and are learning from this and bringing it into their own context. And that is for sure a huge scaling impact that this program also has in this way.
I mean, one of the things that we intentionally try to do with this program is to build a bridge that avoids that we move from maybe an extreme focus on science and engineering as the kind of pinnacle of information finding and knowledge finding and path finding, to a way of acknowledging the gifts of science and engineering and including other ways of knowing as well as. Because what tends to happen after a long focus on one thing is that the people swing to an extreme and dismiss science and engineering altogether. And that would be at this point in human history probably quite catastrophic. But at the same time, it is high time to break down these kind of rigid structures where science has turned into scientism and is unable to listen to other ways of knowing. And so we're consciously bringing into a highly respected university conversations around other ways of knowing, indigenous knowledge, warm data, the science of qualities, the, the deeper insights that come when we understand insights from complexity theory that confront us with fundamental unpredictability and uncontrollability, and this whole approach of letting go of this false promise of total manipulability and controllability, and actually learning how to work with emergence, how to work with dynamic complex systems that will continue to surprise us. And in that context, we've had just such wonderful conversations in the first month with our invited guests, and to be able to invite people like Bayo Akomolafe or Nora Bateson or Fritjof Capra to contribute to this program has for me been one of the highlights. And also then to see how they enjoyed meeting such a high quality group of students, and the level of questions and the level of being able to also let oneself be challenged in one's own basic assumptions without getting into some kind of intellectual jousting, but actually saying, this doesn't compute for me, but please tell me more. I found really fascinating. What were some of your highlights in these conversations?
Yeah, no, that's I'm totally with you here. This I like to call it hybridizing of science design practice, and that's also part of our role of working on this resilient and regenerative systems, is also bridging between different clusters, groups, thought schools. And we have a huge opportunity here to be more bridging and be more balancing and finding the kind of shared boundaries, overlays where we know diversity, biodiversity is rich. And we have so much that we can open up, and we're opening up through this program. And I think someone who's taking the program is directly benefiting from that. We are a science engineering hosted based program that, as you said, is consciously opening up in different ways of knowing and reasoning, and creating new spaces for this in the discourse and the practice. And same time, by trusting this program and the success of it, and by giving time to subscribe in this program, actively contributes to transforming, opening up also academia, which we know is an important process. So it's a transformative in many ways, in a systemic way. And to me, one of the highlights and challenges is to bridge this and opening up without being extreme to any of these sites, but continuously being aware that we are hovering in a kind of very dynamic spaces here, and that we ideally come to something that I would call systemic design. It's a kind of challenge-based navigation in complexity by enacting with different types of methodologies and tools, both quantitative, scientific methods, engineering methods, and same time the designerly ways of doing, of research by design, and the deep practical embodied knowledge of being involved and having done work out there. And there's some examples. It's the notion of transdisciplinarity, which is one of the, let's say, scientific framings of joint continuous problem framing between science and praxis. When you are a practitioner and you're living in a place like both of us do, in like many others in these bioregional contexts, in communities, then we suddenly realize that there's a facet that we don't see when we talk from the theory mostly, and that is, in this case, rebuilding trust over decades, because it's almost a life commitment, and we do disappoint people, and we get disappointed, and we cannot step out after 3 or 5 years because the project finance is over, and we do a paper on it. So that's something, an example for deep embodied practice that then interacts with the scientific, the sound scientific base, let's say, whatever, calling it myself sometimes our homework of reading, of informing ourselves before we enter this kind of discourse in a fond way, and then listening to the place specificities in the place. Yeah.
The other dimension that I think is really important to highlight that I think makes this course still extremely innovative is that the first module is called Worldviews, and it actually invites people into becoming more conscious of how their mental scaffolding, their organizing ideas, their narrative about what the world is and how it looks, whether it's entirely science-based or based on other ways of believing, is fundamentally influencing how they will go about designing social, ecological, or economic solutions. And just to use a scientific term, the ability to have a second level observer awareness, to step out of one's own involvement with a subject and pay attention to how am I actually approaching this subject and how am I thinking about it. That for so many professionals and so many people is really still extremely revolutionary. And at the same time, doing it together creates a culture that is then more open to create together because you can agree to disagree on the basis that you're simply taking both informative but not necessarily commensurate perspectives onto the larger system. And I find that that's something that combined with this personal quest that goes also in the interior searching, which gets triggered when you are confronted with your own patterns of perception, so to speak. I find that is to have been able to anchor that in a university of this caliber is one of the things that I'm really quite proud of that we.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's not in our culture to question ourselves. In doing this as a practice, as you said, and in the safe space of this learning group where we practice it together, helps each other to open up and bring that back. And certain didactic tools like the view from above, which is based also on the idea of leverage points to some context, but it's an embodied practice of climbing a higher viewpoint, or using drones as a kind of fun practice with technology to at the end have a kind of metaphor and a proxy to reach this kind of questioning, zooming out and having this meta perspective or of meta design or this mental scaffolding. And that's again different didactics that make that possible. And it has a very sound connection to deep scientific discourse in systems science, for example. And same time, it's an embodied practice that helps us in everyday life to deal with what we all are dealing with. And that kind of interplay is also where I really think often when I now talk to many potential interested people and applicants, and when we in our teams mentoring with each other, I can always say I'm learning so much from these interactions. So it's this beautiful notion that Terry Irvine once said in a relating system thinking and design conference. It was the first time I heard it, is being lifelong students of systems, and that's a beautiful culture where I often think, man, if I wouldn't be in this role of holding and developing this program, I would just love to study it and honestly be there to bring in my own quest. I have so many questions, and letting myself a bit fall into the holding of the program. My co-learners who are as professional as I am, and then, as you mentioned, some of these amazing thinkers out there and people we can learn so much from, and then being nudged really to, and also a bit pushed out of my comfort zone to develop this deep science-based, designerly embodied enacting with complexity in the direction of regeneration. And at the end, I mean, having a Master of Advanced Studies by ETH in Regenerative Systems on my record CV, I mean, would be helping me for sure in my experience of applying lots of jobs. And so that's just a byproduct. But yeah, I can just say out of deep of my heart that I would be like, I would just love to be able to study myself. So I'm studying indirectly through our program and with everybody who's involved here, yeah, including.
I have the same feeling. Like there are aspects of the course that I was not directly involved in because they're taught by other people, and I kind of wish I had the space in my life at the moment to just simply sit in on all of that. And I'm actually looking forward of doing that over the years because there's just so much to learn in this course. But before we end, like a reflection on what are actually regenerative systems and how we bring that into the course in such a way that ultimately we almost deconstruct it. Because on the one hand, any system is a mental framework of looking at a particular aspect of a nested complexity that connects that system with a larger system. So to some extent, systems are arbitrary projections of mind. But then on the other hand, what is a regenerative system? Every living being, if you look at living systems, whether it's a cell, a human being, a community, an ecosystem, or the biosphere, has regeneration as a fundamental characteristic and is a regenerative system. Otherwise, it wouldn't be alive. And so playing with this somewhat paradoxical notion that we can't predict and control and we can't fundamentally manipulate these living complex dynamic systems. And therefore, design is also something that isn't a hard and fast engineering practice, but it is something that has to be in dialogue with the system and has to constantly, every outcome of design has to become a prototype and then be reflected again against the impact on the system and possibly be challenged and transformed. And I think that in itself is also extremely innovative about this course, that we use these terms, designing regenerative and resilient systems, but we also break open the mental frameworks that one could get stuck in when one hears these words.
Yeah, that's part of the challenges. We somehow crave for direct cornerstones, boundaries. We are in a mechanistic worldview, in a system here where we live and come from, and so we're always trying to be reduced to a certain drawer, a certain box. And so, as I said, how can we see and play in a holistic context and in relational terms, and same time be getting also concrete in diving, for example, in architecture, in materials, in agriculture, in mobility, energy, and all these aspects, of course, correlate and are together. And that's the core of thinking in systems here. And yet, what I think helps, as you mentioned often, is asking questions, and these questions can be, I think, related to principles, and they are in correspondence with different ways of formulating them. But the question obviously is so powerful since it involves people on a cognitive level, and they can be related to specific situations. What I think is often connected to this is we are starting also in our communication. It's for me also continuous learning. We're starting from this deep notion of meta crisis, poly crisis, nested crisis. Yes, that I think is absolutely there. And we are feeling impacts of these crises and how fast they interrelate more and more. At the same time, we are coming out of fascination of the beauty for designing together interventions, pathways that are better. And this is where the most of the energy lies. That's why I think both of us work in these bioregional contexts, because it's so practical and it's so motivating how many things we are able to redesign or install together and take positive energies from. And the kind of solution pathways are so imminent. We know way enough to act right now. And so for me, a big element here in finding guidance, in wanting definitions, is yes, serving this to a certain way because it is of help, but taking it light enough to say that the main capacity comes to be good navigators, good guides, to understand where are some boundary types, cornerstones, but where's my North Star? Where's my positive, value-based orientation that helps me to go in a direction, and where's our shared ethos in this process?
Yeah, I think that's, I mean, that the whole program has a fundamental life-affirming ethos, trying to be of service to a humane and livable human future. And it is only through these anchor points that are provided by the two landscapes in which we make everything specific, that we can actually claim that it's a regenerative program, because part of this shift towards working regeneratively is always, it has to be place and culture specific. And yet, of course, a lot of the tools that we explore can be used in different contexts, but they have to always test against the reality of real people in real places. And that's also where the flip happens, where suddenly the poly crisis and the meta crisis turn into meta potential and poly potential. And I think that's also what I think people are really appreciating, because creativity gets locked down when we come from a place of fear. And yes, systems are breaking down around us, but we also give people with the adaptive cycle and the adaptive waves and understanding that breakdown and collapse of structures that no longer serve is actually part of the next regeneration step of evolving towards structures that do serve. So I'm really excited with regard to how we've created, not only through the MOOCs, an easily accessible for everyone introduction to all of this, but now all these systems where people can really train up in making a difference in their bioregions, and support the regeneration rising. Thanks for this conversation. It was really excellent.
Thank you, Daniel. And there's just another example how much language, how important language is, and there's the discourses we are having over time. As my own reflection, again, the learning progress by continuously formulating and discussing about these very complex, new, and very interconnected topics. The nuances are part of the learning process for all involved, is continuously sharing and having these conversations that are scientific based and then embodied in place. So that's thank you very much for all these learning opportunities together, and it's just great fun.
Excellent. That's what it is. If it's not fun, it's not sustainable, and certainly not regenerative. Okay.